Hi there, Chaz the Advocate here. I'm doing an update on my recent video about Australian government attempts to create a belief that there's some kind of imminent threat of right-wing extremism in Australia. I want to say again that that's a lie. It's not true. Australia's not at the threat of right-wing extremism. Last time, I won't go over this too much again because I covered it fairly extensively last time, but essentially, if you follow on what's been going on in the last 12 months while this COVID hoax has been rolled out, you've had the usual grouping of politicians. Here you go, head of ASIO, Mike Burgess, supposedly reporting back in February or late 2019, Australia is under the threat of right-wing extremism, and it's real and growing. This is Peter Dutton, who's the Home Affairs Minister in Australia for the Liberal National Party, former Queensland copper. The Director General did not mention left-wing extremism at all during the address. So that's an interesting basic layout of the way it was first up. And Peter Dutton has declared that left-wing terrorism includes Islamist extremism after being blasted by Labor, his his very leftist opposition, for applying false equivalence in the national security debate. This false equivalence is the left's way of saying, no, we're the good guys, we're the good fascists. No, there's only right-wing extremism. And you're seeing this borne out 12 months later in the United States as we speak. Not just the United States, but definitely the United States, post Biden's theft of their presidential election. And that is that they're ramming home this vindictive agenda to shut anyone up who they deem to have been against them. That's, wow, communism 101. People like Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, Mao, they would have been happy to put their moniker on that ideology, because that's what communism's all about. This is the way we're doing it. If you don't like it, we'll kill you. That's pretty much it. They mightn't say it that openly up front, but that's what they mean. One way or another, we'll kill you, even if it's in 1,000 cuts by losing your job, losing your family, losing your sanity, losing your health, and eventually your life. And if you become too troublesome, we'll fit you up for something and throw you in jail and maybe forget about you. In China, you're seeing it in the northwest with the Uyghurs, Falun Gong, any so-called dissidents. Step out of line, an unmarked car will come around late at night, kick your door in, drag you out, and you probably won't be seen again. And if you're really unlucky, they'll steal your organs. This is what's happening in China. I wish it wasn't true, but there's significant evidence to show that it is from people who actually live there and have seen it and witnessed the goings-on. We don't want these kind of nutters running our countries and then having the balls to call us right-wing extremists because we dare to call them out on it. And it goes further than just right-wing extremists now. They're very quick to move over to the label of right-wing terrorist. And as you can see, that first page was from Dutton in February last year. This is September last year. And Keneally, who's his opposite number, was complaining that tech companies should disrupt and deter people attempting to search for right-wing extremist content. Now, who decides what's right-wing extremist content? Well, one of the primary groups that decides, ultimately, is the ADL and B'nai B'rith in the States. This is Ryan Christian and Whitney Webb, who have a great show where they get together and talk about the true nature of who's running things and how they're using intelligence services, the massive role that the Israeli Mossad, B'nai B'rith, Shin Bet, 8200, Unit 8200, which is their warfare level cyber attack group. If you can think of a battalion of the really elite soldiers, then this is a battalion of elite cyber soldiers who are destroying, trolling, excuse me, you name it, they're doing it. Anyway, I credit obviously Ryan and Whitney for this bit of footage. This footage is of the US Senate hearing headed by a guy called Rose, who's a Zionist, and two people he's got there who are speaking, Neumann and what's the other lady's name? We'll see in a second anyway.
It's really all leads to the same stuff anyway. So,
right. Okay, well, so let's start with this clip. Now, this is 2 minutes. Unfortunately, unlike the other platform, I have to let it play for the clip, but it's 2 minutes and a half, I think, and then we can comment on what they have to say about it. Now, if you guys remember, this was a clip that we already dissected and discussed before all of this, and basically discussed I'm going to include all those links for everybody as well, the election special part 1, 2, and 3, where Whitney lays out all of her research about, what we thought was going to happen, what she saw coming, and so on. So let's take a peek at this clip again, and you'll probably be shocked just to see the ties here.
Our extraordinary slate of witnesses from the FBI and Department of Homeland Security for coming here today to testify on the federal government's response to the rise in anti-Semitic domestic terrorism. And I'm sure in the process we'll also be focusing on generally the issue of domestic terrorism. This is not a question of either or. Okay? We are not losing sight of jihadi terrorism and the threat that it continues to pose, but there is no doubt these statistics do not lie. The rise of domestic terrorism and the anti-Semitic threads running through it are an incredibly real problem. I've got people in my community, people in communities throughout this country that are afraid to go outside wearing their kippah, afraid to congregate, afraid to observe the high holy days, and people generally.
So I'm just going to interrupt it there for a second so you can hear this guy Rose immediately frames it as a Jewish issue, that his Jewish community friends can't go outside wearing their kippah on what is on the high holy. Give me a break. The number of so-called anti-Semitic attacks in the United States or anywhere are minuscule, but anything, any criticism, any slight, anything they don't like, they frame it as extremism and anti-Semitism. And this is where the ideological drive for getting governments to claim that there's a threat of right-wing extremism comes from. It's always come from the Zionist communist. Zionism and communism are essentially the same thing. Zionism, communism, globalism, they're all one and the same. The same power, financial power, of usury, of control, of massive corporations running across international boundaries through, what do they call it, the law of the sea, which is, the law that usurps our constitutional law. Australia hasn't been a constitutional monarchistic country since I think it was the 1980s. One of our treasonous prime ministers snuck some legislation through. Like most countries, we're basically just a corporate office now. If you see all of your government titles and that in caps, it's because you're a corporate entity under international the law of the sea, which usurps our common law and is there to enable trade between countries, but it was never designed to actually control our countries from a constitutional point of view. But anyway, that's another more technical discussion. It's a very interesting discussion because you realise how illegal everything is that's being done to us. But anyway, I'll let Mr. Rose continue.
Are now afraid to do things that they were not afraid to do just a few years ago. We have certainly seen the rise of a global neo-Nazi, white nationalist movement that is deserving of our attention. Many people, experts, have said that this looks like what Al-Qaeda looked like in the 80s and the 90s. Let's not find ourselves asleep at the wheel as we did in the run-up to 9/11. For so many people in my community, it feels like 9/11 was yesterday. These organizations, it is my opinion, and I'm not the only one, need to be identified as foreign terrorist organizations. And if they are not identified as foreign terrorist organizations, you need to tell us that we are still protected.
So he wants these so-called right-wing extremist organisations identified as foreign terrorist organisations. He's trying to equate this, fabricated right-wing extremist threat with international Islamic so-called terrorism. This is the very wily manipulation that Zionists use to con our intelligence services, our governments. At the end of the day, everyone that they use to push this agenda is all primed and primed and paid to follow exactly what they want them to do. You don't get into power in Australia or the United States or the UK, etc., unless international Zionism approves of you. And then they will either fund you into power or they won't. And if anyone alternative, we've got our Pauline Hansons, Malcolm Roberts and a few others in Australia, they are vilified. They use their friends in the media to vilify them endlessly, belittle them, defame them, and then isolate them in government. I think Malcolm Roberts, who's a One Nation senator, recently said that he finds it extremely difficult to get anything done. And when he speaks to people in the Labor and Liberal Party on the quiet, why is everything so difficult? Their stock answer is because most of what you're suggesting goes against our international obligations. So they're openly admitting that they're not governing for us. They're governing for these globalist United Nations power bases, and that we're just living here, and they consider us as sort of like tenants, and we'll do as we're told, and it's only going to become more and more aggressive. Anyway, I'm silencing Mr. Rose, so carry on.
We need to know that when people in America go to train overseas, when people in America are recruited, when people try to come to America who have trained with these organizations, that you have the same tools at your disposal that you do and have had in the fight against jihadi terrorism.
Earlier this month, FBI Director Wray testified that the Bureau had elevated racially motivated violent extremism to a threat level on par, kind of what Chairman Rose was talking about it, with Islamist terrorism. In response, the FBI has established a new fusion cell to better coordinate the response to domestic terrorism and hate crimes, and joint terrorism task forces across the United States have been instructed to increase their focus on domestic terrorism.
Our people are collaborating and communicating at a high level in joint terrorism task forces across the country, and also within the numerous fusion centers throughout the nation. Our partnerships include non-law enforcement agencies from tech companies to faith-based organizations like the Anti-Defamation League. I can tell you from my time in the Upper Midwest, one of our best partners was and still is the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota.
So here, Miss Sanborn, whose name I couldn't remember earlier, is basically laying it on the line that the Jewish communities, the Jewish-run ADL, the B'nai B'rith, any of their extremely well-funded and organised groups that are there to control the political narrative and will continually harass senators, congressmen and women with this same agenda over and over again: right-wing extremism, right-wing extremism. And right-wing extremism is a euphemism for people, light-skinned people of European descent, who are the backbone of countries like the Five Eyes countries, whose 3, 4, 5 or more generations built these societies. And now this same group and these women who are about as white as you can get, but have some kind of Jewish ancestry, or have sold out and gone over to calling themselves Zionists because it works for them. they're enabling the oppression of people of European descent, and they're calling it anti-Semitism. And that's a bald-faced lie. They know it's a lie, but they harp on it about it anyway. And most Zionist Jews are indoctrinated with this kind of rubbish when they're little kids. They're told continually that Jewish people have been oppressed and that they've got to fight back aggressively against this fictitious oppression. But anyway, that's a very long conversation, but most people that know anything about this know what I'm talking about anyway.
Minnesota and the Dakotas. These relationships are working. In just the first quarter of this fiscal year, these types of partnerships have assisted JTTFs across the country in disrupting and arresting 38 terrorism subjects right here in the United States.
Well, comments on this in general before we go to the last clip, which is arguably the most important one.
I won't take any more of Ryan's and Whitney's material, and full credit to them. That Senate hearing was available online, but Ryan cut together some of the more salient points. And if there's anyone that you want to go and listen to who can really open your eyes to this agenda, I think Ryan, Christian, and Whitney Webb on the Last American Vagabond and other sites. There's none better. They've got such a good handle on it. Whitney in particular knows a lot about how the military-industrial complex dominated by Israel and Zionism has a total lock on the United States intelligence services, their military, the Pentagon, Washington, you name it. The vice-like grip that this one tiny little criminal ideology has over the most powerful country in the world, most powerful military in the world, is truly terrifying, and we should be deeply, deeply concerned. Anyway, getting back to the Australian version, as I said in my last video, they want to move very quickly from right-wing extremism into right-wing terrorism. So it's just a slip from one word to the other. If you're a right-wing extremist, in their view, you're someone who's perpetuating ideas that they don't like. They want to be able to shut you down. They want to get this sort of annoyed about it and shout in your face. And ultimately, their goal is for a bunch of thugs to come around to your house, kick your door in, and say you've said some nasty things that we don't like on the internet, much like they would in China, like they would in the Soviet Union. You know, it's called Russia now, but it's just as much of a communist country as it was under Khrushchev and Stalin and Lenin earlier on. So don't be deluded that Russia's now this sort of opened up country. It's not. It's just basically been left to fend for itself, whereas it was being constantly subsidised by the United States all the way through World War II and on right up into the 1980s. We were led to believe there was this Cold War, and all the time the Americans were pouring billions of dollars into the Soviet Union because it served a purpose for them. And, you know, the Americans would have such an amazing country now if they'd been left to profit from their own hard work rather than having it stolen from them endlessly by Zionist-controlled central banks. It's happened everywhere else as well, but it was really cancerous in the United States, and you're seeing the results now. Anyway, moving on. Try not to get distracted too much. As I said in my last talk, it went from September last year, November, and then these anti-lockdown protesters were treated appallingly in Victoria, and they want to, you know, your friends at Commie Central, The Guardian, want you to believe that anyone that doesn't go along with it must be vilified. And you've got Professor Michelle Grossman, who's a Zionist advisor. She's extremely well funded, extremely well promoted. I talked about that last time. You know, Australia and New Zealand counter-terrorism, Department of Home Affairs, which is Peter Dutton, his own department, Victoria Police, who are the thug police group within Australia. Quite happy to have someone tell the politicians and tell the public, well, yes, you know, we've got right-wing extremism, so that way the cops can go, well, you know, this is how we think we should deal with it, and this is how they are dealing with it. People go to buy their vegetables at St Elizabeth, I think it is, or Elizabeth Market in Victoria, back in, I think it was November, and this bunch of thugs came marching through. You don't send people like this out unless you've got really aggressive, violent extremists with throwing bricks and Molotov cocktails and setting up barriers with burning tyres. That's when you send these kind of people out. You don't send these kind of people out for a bunch of mums and dads in their bloody T-shirts and shorts and thongs going to buy vegetables who just happen to say, we don't believe your COVID hoax. But that psychopath in Victoria, Daniel Andrews, I can't believe sections of the media are actually saying he's doing a good job. The media's unhinged when they push lies like that. This isn't how you deal with mums and dads. Anyway, what more can I say? It's happening overseas as well. I looked further afield in America and the ADL. This is the UK, Sky News in the UK. Right-wing extremism is UK's fastest growing threat. Exactly the same thing as what you're seeing in Australia. There you go, November, same timing. It's like David Icke says, you've got a corporate headquarters that rolls the same garbage out all over the world, and that's what we're seeing with this COVID hoax and this push for a great reset and ultimately a one-world communist surveillance state. What happened to the British Bobby? Now they're walking around with bloody assault rifles all the time. And you've got this guy Neil Basu. They've got to have their, talking head who's there to give some kind of authority to it. He's just the British version of, Dutton or even Professor Michelle. And I certainly don't want anyone to think that she's a one-trick pony. She may be a one-trick pony, but she's not alone. These people are part of this Ver2 research network that she is a significant figure in, and they're all on the same page. If you break open these extended biographies, it basically says the same thing: countering violent extremism, and has undertaken research on the supervision of terrorist offenders. Okay, if that's what this guy's doing, then, maybe he's okay. But there are violent extremists. Most of them, unfortunately, are Islamic extremists, and I'm not commenting one way or the other on why there is Islamic extremism, other than to say that it's been very ably encouraged by groups like ISIL and ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The first two are known to be Mossad fronts, Israeli intelligence fronts. There's no two ways about that. I think Ayman Zawahiri, who was bin Laden's number 2, has said as much about the guy who was heading up, I think it was ISIS. So, let's not believe that Muslims are running around wanting to cut people's heads off. A lot of that's all confabulated and created by groups like the Mossad. Many of these other people are on the same page as Michelle Grossman. They're talking about global terrorism, violent extremism. And you go, okay, well, we don't want violent extremism. No, we don't. But we don't want the wrong people swept up in any push against violent extremism. And that's what's they're trying to steer it away from jihadi terrorism and now focus it on the ordinary Australians like you and I. Anyone who dares to say, we don't want to go along with your COVID hoax, we don't want our democratic nation state squashed, people losing thousands of jobs, people being fined ridiculous amounts of money. Some of the fines I've seen that people have been subjected to, particularly in Victoria, for these COVID garbage is beggars belief. And there's one guy, Avi Yemeni from Rebel News, who's done a lot of good work in trying to raise money for people to push back against these fines, and he's paid a price for it himself. Here we go. Dr. Deborah Smith is mentioned in one of these on one of these pages as well. Where is it? Talking about extremism. That one is in December. Yeah, Dr. Christy Campion. And further down, there we go. Dr. Deborah Smith, a researcher at Victoria University, focused on violent political extremism. Political extremism, see, that's a euphemism for people who don't want to be treated like garbage, basically. Said the current counter-terrorism framework was developed in a period of a different threat complex, and it was time to rethink the government's approach. And, this is the kind of so-called expert that they're relying on to advise governments, which Monash University, it's sort of like Yale or Harvard. She has a particular interest in the role of emotion within violent extremism. Okay. Examine emotional investment in violent and non-violent extremist groups. See, the core question here you go. She's obviously associated with Michelle Grossman, so that's very telling. So they're all on the same page. Not all of these people in the Avert network might be as gung-ho about right-wing extremism, but this woman definitely is. She says as much in her associations with Zionist Professor Michelle Grossman, and I'm sure Professor Ramon Spahi is probably the same. But yeah, who decides what right-wing extremism is? What qualifies this woman to determine for the police, for government, in her probably very lucrative, tenured, cushy position at a university? Who qualified her to say what's right-wing extremism? That's their own confabulation. No one gave them the right to come in and just determine arbitrarily, well, like they have in the States now. Since Biden's gotten into power, they want to basically say anyone that goes against the Democratic Party is a right-wing extremist. Anyone that voted for Donald Trump is a right-wing extremist. They're setting out to destroy them. The hoaxed insurrection. What a setup that was. Wow. I can't believe Trump didn't know that they were going to set him up in that way. One of the guys that went in there, who went on CNN and admitted that he was actually an Antifa plant, his brother came out and said that the whole thing was put together by, it was either 126 or 226 Antifa thugs who pretended to be Trumpists, who were allowed to enter the Capitol building. You had a bunch of cops who had their faces covered, who just pulled the barriers back, and in they ran around for a photo op, smashed a few things, screamed and yelled. You had that clown in the horns and painted face who turned out to be an actor, who'd taken a convenient selfie with Rudy Giuliani in the earlier. You can't write this stuff. It's dreamt up by nutters in the FBI who enable most terrorism in the United States. The FBI has been caught out so many times now, goading people, encouraging people, a lot of them not very smart people, to get involved in some kind of terrorism so they can then rush in and save the world and take credit for it. It's sad. It's very sad, and we should be deeply concerned. That's why we can't listen to these people telling us that we're under some threat of right-wing extremism unless they provide evidence, and they can't provide evidence. That's something that all of this is very short on. Where's the proof? There's no proof. It's just them screaming and yelling in Parliament and thumping their chest, going on about a focus on right-wing. That's the giveaway. When they focus on right-wing extremism and now terrorism, that's criminal. They're basically saying people who have what they deem to be extreme views are now a little slip of the pen, a little slip of the tongue. Now you're a terrorist. So you go from someone with unsavoury political views, in their mind, to being someone who's prepared to kill people and blow things up because you don't like the fact that we're being lied to about a COVID hoax and that they want to turn us into communist China. That's one step too far for me, and I think it should be step too far for Australians in general. So anyway, like I said, I looked at the UK, and then, look at this. This is how I asked earlier what happened to the British Bobby. Here's your British Bobbies. You've got these clowns that run around like they're in some kind of nightmarish computer game, or they're all hopped up on adrenaline and going to a psycho bloody paintball game. Only thing is, these aren't paintball guns. The number of times that you would require people kitted out like this, you could count on one hand in 20 years. And the fact that they've got these idiots running around dressed like this shows you that they're trying to ramp up and militarise the police to such an extent that it's got to the point of stupidity. I've seen in my role cops going to bust people for various mid-level drug crimes in Australia. They might have a kilo of this, whatever the hell it is, and they roll up dressed like this. You don't need people dressed like that to arrest someone for a drug offence, for crying out loud. If you want to go in there with someone with guns, then you go in with your, it's all right to wear a bloody bulletproof vest and go in there with your semi-automatic handgun, but unless you have very good intelligence that there's someone in there that's going to fight back against you with something like a bloody assault rifle or something worse, there is absolutely no reason to send people like this. But yet, you will see it time and time again in all the states on the eastern seaboard of Australia, where they roll up in a what is an armoured personnel carrier with all of these clowns who often stand on the outside on the running board. So what the hell's that all about? Why even take an armoured personnel carrier? They'll tell you, well, we want to make sure we're protecting our members. They always talk about protecting their members. Yeah, they protect their members all right, but they don't protect the public. There's so many people getting shot under very dodgy circumstances and killed in Australia these days. It's really concerning. There was a Islamic guy got killed on a motorway just over a couple of suburbs over here, and his father came out on the media and was really annoyed. His son was a bit radical. I don't want to talk about the case too much, but what his father was saying, and he was right, was why did they have to kill him? They didn't have to kill him. He had a knife, sure, but he wasn't, he wasn't in a position to kill anyone. And if you're going to take someone down who's disturbed, there's a lot of other ways besides blowing them away with all of this. And this is what's going wrong with our society when you have police normalising this kind of, look at these idiots, look at this guy here, I'm so cool. It's, oh God, I can't stand looking at it. It makes me want to throw up. And the same in Victoria. When I saw this in Victoria, I just thought, you got to be kidding me. I don't know in my 60 years that I've ever seen a time, maybe during the Vietnam War protests in the 1960s when I was a kid, but other than that, I don't think I've ever seen a time where cops needed to be dressed like this, ever. And the fact of the matter is, they're kitted up like that because back in 2018 they were testing out. They've known ahead of time that this was coming, and they were planning. What's the best gear? We're going to probably have riots when we roll out this hoaxed virus, and because the hoaxed virus is just a means to an end. These wealthy psychopaths who've appointed themselves rulers of the world didn't bother to ask anyone what we thought. Your Klaus Schwabs, your World Economic Forums, your Prince Charleses, your Lizzie, Queen Elizabeth, all of these wealthy Zionist, Rothschild, Rockefeller, the pyramid of criminality. If you want to see the way it's all run, there's plenty of examples of it on the internet. If you go further down, I think it's wrong one. Go back again. Don't even know my own website. Further down on the old first one that I had there, it shows the pyramid of control. It shows the way the world is run. Here we go. The world monarch, and you go, oh, who's that? Is that Queen Elizabeth? No. They think it's Lucifer. This is the thing. These are the people that want to run the world. They genuinely think Lucifer is the ruler of the world, and they follow a doctrine of Luciferianism. Now, the real nutty ones, we'll just call it outright Satanism, but the Rothschilds, the Committee of 300, world's richest, most powerful subfamilies, and this Council of 13 is the world's richest, most powerful families. And you've got the Lees, the Kennedys, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds. I can't remember the rest of them. There's a book by Fritz Springmeier that lays this out, amongst many others. But yeah, further down you see the think tanks, and these are the ones that come up with all of this rubbish about right-wing extremism. The banks and all of these groups that use money to control everyone, and their friends and these big corporations, they're basically like the leverage. They're in the mafia. They're the thugs that go around extorting everyone to force them to do what they want. These are the ideologues, and these are these wealthy nutcases and greedy parasites. This is your parasite corporate. This group here. They're certainly evident down here. Then you've got your religions, which are all basically faked and controlled anyway. Your intelligence, military, police, so corrupt. The courts are so corrupt these days, they're a joke. If anything needs to be reformed, everyone in the States is going, defund the police, defund the police. I'd be defunding the court system before I did anything, because these are the people that can actually decide what these, not so much military anymore, but what these three, prisons and police and themselves, can do, and the intelligence community. And then you've got our friends in the media. And here we all are down the bottom, being squashed by the weight of all of these lunatics. So this is the nutty world we find ourselves in. There's no right-wing extremism in countries like Australia. It's all bollocks. It's all designed to intimidate us. And this is the website of Ryan Christian and Whitney Webb's on, called The Last American Vagabond. Check it out. You know, these two people do some great work, and full credit to them. So, you know, what more can I say? I wanted to make it a quick update, and all I really did was that I identified that it's going on in the UK, it's going on in the US, you can bet it's going on in Canada. I don't talk about Canada so much. I know people in Canada, I have contacts over there who are prized. It's it's arguable as to who's the most aggressive in pushing this globalist leftist agenda, whether it's the Canadians, the Brits, or our psycho friend in Victoria, Daniel Andrews. The other premiers in Australia are following suit in a less aggressive manner, but they're all on the same page. They're all guilty of the same lies. So, yeah, they love bringing out the Christchurch shooter. That's every time you sort of say, well, what right-wing extremism? That's straight away what they go to. They like you to think that there's Brenton Tarrants under every bed and behind every door, which is a crock. If you look into the history of this guy, he's definitely a mind-controlled MK-Ultra patsy. And, you know, for anyone that doesn't believe in MK-Ultra, they use trauma-based mind control. A lot of these people come from military families, generational satanic families, and these kids are treated like garbage, tortured, sexually abused from an early age, and it splits their personality. And with the use of drugs and sophisticated hypnotism, they can get them to do anything, and they can create what they call alters, where one personality is completely separated from another personality. They can get, in women, there's good examples of this. I can't remember the names of all of them at the moment, but they're there if you want to look into MK-Ultra, who are used as sex slaves. And 1 minute they'll be a sex slave, and then the next minute when they're triggered into another alter by their handler, they go back to being quite normal, conservative, ordinary women. It's disgusting what they do. And they also bring out talents like photographic memories. They're used in espionage. They're used as drug couriers. If you want to look into how a shooter can be created who will do something violent and extreme and won't have any memory of doing it, look into MK-Ultra, look into the Manchurian Candidate, what a Manchurian Candidate is. There was a movie with Sinatra in the 60s, another one with Bronson called Telephone, I think in the 1970s. These are real things that the military and intelligence services have been using for a long time, and it provides the perfect way for them to create the perception that there's nutty, nerdy, what do they call them, incels, who are these frustrated, nerdy, always white. They won't, even though a lot of the shooters aren't white, they want you to believe they are, and that they're involuntarily celibate, they can't get sex, they're misogynists, and they just want to run out and blow everyone away, so we've got to take their guns away. This is the warped worldview that these lunatic globalists are following. and they're taking advice from Professor Michelle and her friends in the avert, like Dr. Deborah Smith. You know, they're probably very nice people. I don't want to besmirch them as people, but what the hell happened to them that they believe this garbage? It's, I don't know. You find it very hard to stay positive with all of this crap. You really do, but we've got to confront it, because step by step by step by step, and you look at what rights they've taken away from us since the beginning of 2020 and this COVID hoax started. They're shutting our borders. They're fining us ridiculous amounts of money. They're forcing us to walk around in masks. You know, they seriously said in the US the other day that people should wear 3 masks, and someone said 5 masks. I remember seeing footage of 2 teenage girls who were jumping on a plane in Sydney, and they wanted to get out of Sydney before the lockdowns, and they had full plastic, like bio suits on. They were wearing double masks, and they had like those clear perspex tilt-down face shields that you see in workshops where people don't want little bits of steel flying into their faces. That's what they were wearing at a Sydney airport, ready to jump onto a plane to come to Queensland. I mean, this is how deep this psycho scenario is being imposed, foisted, whatever the hell you want to call it, on our society, and we've got to push back. You know, I'm not suggesting anything extreme, because I don't believe in this extremist garbage. It's not true. They're making it up. This guy tried to sort of put some reason into it, but he'll cave. They'll nag him and harass him, and he'll be overruled by Morrison, the smirking assassin who runs the Liberal Party. So, you know, good attempt there, Peter Dutton, but in the end he'll be bullied and forced into line. Anyway, enough said. I need some coffee. All the best. I'm Chaz the Advocate.